jump in as they trickle on in. So we'll do our usual warm-up to begin with. Looking over our shoulders, getting those neck and shoulder muscles a little loosened up. Especially, like I said, I've been working at the coffee table all week, where it's a little bit cooler, and definitely hunched over because of that. So getting the muscles loosened.
I just wish.
Up and down. Sorry, what was that?
I just was saying, I just wish my employer would just like give us a, even if it wasn't a final extension of our work from home, like a, at least until X date.
Yeah.
I would feel like I could put improvements more into my workspace.
Hey, we're going to roll our heads from shoulder to shoulder. Yeah, I work from home full time anyways, so.
Yeah.
Just kind of nice. Gotta keep these shoulders down. Not shrugging up, cheating. Good, now we're gonna do arm circles, shoulder circles. And reverse directions. Good, now arm circles in front of us. Rounding that base runner home. And reverse. And switch arms. And reverse directions. Good, now we're gonna do those self hugs. Keeping those arms at chest to shoulder height. Alternating which one is on top, really kind of working on stretching those back and chest muscles while we go back and forth. Good, now we're gonna do our reach backs. So again, it's like there's a glass of water on the imaginary table behind me, and I'm just reaching back to grab it, keeping my legs still, so all this twisting's done with the torso. Go nice and easy with your spine here, kind of just slowly ease into it. Good, now we're gonna do our hula hoops. So just big old hip circles, like we do, gotta hula hoop around our hips. And reverse directions. Good. Now we're going to do our ankle rolls. So again, we're just making circles with our ankles, dropping our webcams in the process. Taking my foot on the ground, just kind of like digging circles in the imaginary dirt that is my floor, or I can just keep my foot in the air, making little circles in the air with my ankles, just kind of work some balance. Nice to get some good balance work in while I can. And reverse directions. And switch legs. And reverse. Good. Now we're going to do our wrist rolls. Let's get those forearms and wrists nice and loosened up. I'm really trying to make big circles with my wrist, so it kind of like goes to the entire range of motion. And reverse directions. Good. And now for these last 30 seconds or so, hit up whatever muscle group that you know you need to warm up a little bit more. We do my side-to-side lunges as always. I can get my hips and groin muscles a little bit more limber. Good. Grab your swords and we'll jump into the sword portion of our warm-up. So as always, we're going to do our 6 rounds of 40 seconds work, 10-second break, basically, just to kind of get ready to switch to the next one. First round, as always, we're going to be going from our defensive posture into the offensive posture. Rotate through all 4 guards. If you know, I know some of you guys have gone through my offhand and dagger class. If you want to practice your closed guards too, that's fine. Otherwise, just go through all 4 guards as normal like we've been doing. You got 10 seconds. Probably put the volume up so you can all hear this thing. So 40 seconds, just going from our defensive posture, sword extends, then I go into my primo to begin with, still keeping my weight on that back leg, and just recover. Just gonna go through each of these 4 guards, always making sure the point of my sword leads first, then the arm, then the body. Make sure when I get into this offensive posture that I'm in the guard that I want to be. I don't want to be already forward and still kind of finagling with my position, so I want to make sure that sword is out there and turned by the time I finish. Good. 10-second break. Next up, we're going to do a find and lunge. So just go from the inside into the outside, alternate with each rep. So I'm going to step, pretend like I find my opponent on the inside line, extend to gain, and then lunge, recover. Now I'm going to do the outside line, pretend I find my opponent on the outside, extend to gain, and lunge, recover. Just going back and forth, both of these. Go whatever speed works for you. Good, 10-second break. Next up, we're going to do Capoferro to a lunge. So as we, you can do this with an advancing step if you have the room. Otherwise, you can just do the stationary. I'm going to do a Capoferro, extend, and into a lunge. I'm going to alternate between the inside and outside lines with that one as well. So you got 5 seconds to get going. Start with the disengage, extend, and lunge. I can also do this just stationary, as if I'm trying to strike my opponent in primo tempo as they step forward into my lunge range. Or I can do it with my own advance, mixing up, combining blade work with footwork. Always a good way of making it a little bit more challenging, but if you are new to all these mechanics, simplifying and breaking it down, perfectly fine, so you feel pretty comfortable with it. Cool, 10 seconds. Next up is going to be a volta stabile to a lunge. So similar like we just did, when we're just doing the volta stabile, which is that hand turn. And we're going to be alternating from the inside and the outside line again. Again, I can do this stationary from side to the inside, volta stabile to the outside, and then lunge. Can also do it with footwork. So as I step forward, I do my volta stabile and then lunge. Then I can do that same thing on the outside line with the extra footwork. Good. Next up, we're going to do a parry riposte. So again, our parry is just like our finding. It's the same kind of blade action. And then we're going to riposte after. So we're saying my opponent throws a shot. I just find their sword, which is my parry. So I'm really just doing that with the tip. Then I extend and riposte with my lunge and recover. And I can do this, again, both on the inside and the outside line. Outside line, imaginary opponent attacks. I parry by angling the point over the sword. Extend and lunge for my riposte. Good, and next up, we're going to do a leaning lunge into a passing lunge. If you have the room, if not, just worry about passing lunges. So how I'm doing this is I'm going into my game position, lean forward. I realize I'm not close enough. My opponent's running away. So I'm just going to go right into a transition to my passing lunge. And I can change guards too to kind of imagine my imaginary opponent here shifting their sword around while I'm doing this. So again, defensive posture, offensive posture, leaning lunge. Just have to run away, so I follow with my pass. Making sure I'm still trying to get profiled or using closed guards to kind of help close the line off. And that is it. Grab a drink of water and we'll jump into tonight's class.
Activity completed.
So any questions before we begin on what we did last week on tempo and all that stuff? Cool. So tonight we're going to be looking at basic Italian Rapier flowchart. This is called the True Fight. It's a training tool that Devin Borman over at Academy Duello kind of created based off a bunch of the Italian texts and stuff. I find it's a good beginner tool to kind of get an idea of what to do once you get in measure and get into combat with an opponent. Because a lot, like we've gone through a lot of techniques. What happens with a lot of people, especially when they're new, they get into the cross blades of their opponent, they get into measure, and they're like, oh, what do I do now? So this kind of gives you just a little bit of a flow chart. This is the one we're going to be going over is what I call like level 1. It's like super basic. Your opponent never tries to free their sword. We always have control over their sword. So we just need to worry about what they're doing with their bodies in terms of they can either move forward, they can stay stationary, or they can move backwards or retreat. So we only need to worry about what they're doing with their body in terms of those 3 options. More difficult versions of this flowchart has them changing lines. We can do it with like they have control of the blade and we need to get control back and all this stuff. But we're really just going to worry about super easy. Our opponent just letting us dominate their sword the entire time. In general, I also created a text-based game off this flowchart. I'll share the link out. So if you're like, hey, I want to play a fencing choose your own adventure game, you can do that from the comfort of your own home now. So I'll share that link after and I'll kind of walk through if we have some time and stuff. But for the True Fight, we basically have 4 basic rules. Well, before I get to that, so we got the True Fight, which is when we're always trying to control our opponent's sword. There's also like the Deceptive Fight, which has things like feints and void. It's basically us trying to make our opponent think we're going to do one thing and then do something else. And then there's the adaptive fight, which is just kind of like that Fabris kind of just always walking forward until you do your drive-by, stab the guy, and keep on going kind of thing. So there are other aspects of fencing that this flowchart doesn't cover, but this is just a real nice basic 101 kind of flowchart. So there are 4 rules that we want to kind of keep in mind with the true fight. One is we always want to seek control over our opponent's weapon, so we always want to be controlling it. 2, we only move forward if we have control. So if I have control of my opponent's swords, I have them found and stringered, now I can move forward. Because if I don't have control, I move forward, they could hit me, not a good time for me. If I don't have control, I want to seek control while moving backwards. So if my opponent has control of my sword, I would do a retreat with like a cavicione or some other blade action. And the 4th is we strike in tempo. So again, we're seeking for our opponent to be moving either forward or backwards for us to give them a strike. Sometimes them standing still is a tempo if they haven't like that, like a brain fart, like the little blue screen of death while they're fencing you and stuff. That's a tempo that you can hit them because they're not waiting. They're just kind of like confused for a second. So there's a difference between I'm not moving because I'm waiting for you and like I'm not moving because I'm like, my brain froze for a second. And that can be a little bit hard to recognize, especially with masks on, if we can't easily see our opponent's face. So that's just, that kind of comes down to a lot of practice, being able to read other body language. Do they seem relaxed or do they seem tense? But that's really kind of like experience on a lot of practice and stuff to pick up on that kind of body language stuff. Before we get into the actual flowchart, any questions on those 4 rules? Cool. What were the 4 rules? No, you can all say out one. You don't have to like get all 4. You can just throw one out there. We can kind of hop around. Listen.
Always have control.
Yep, that's one of them. What's another one?
Do I get to go or is it somebody else's turn?
Andre on mic, so let's see here.
Don't move forward if you don't have control.
Correct. Yep, so if we don't have control, we want to move back and seek control. That's another way of rephrasing that one. What's another one? It's similar to what Andre just said, just reworded in another way.
If you have to, moving backwards and finding control is okay? Something.
Yeah, if you don't have control, you move backwards. That's how I rephrase Andre. So there's the flip side of that one, which is
regain control going forward.
Yep. If you have control, now you can move forward. And the 4th one.
Always strike in tempo.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you, Mary. So good job. So those are the 4 basic ideas. Kind of keep in mind while we're going through this flow chart and stuff. Again, we're not really worried about not having control for this one, but it is important to recognize when you're fencing somebody. If you don't have control of their blade, moving forward is probably not your best option unless you really think you're that much craftier and faster than they are and stuff. So to start off with, we're going to be starting out of measure. Let me just bring my big screen up for this recording so you can see. There we go. So we're going to start off out of measure to begin with. So again, in this flow chart, your opponent can do 3 things. They can either move forward, they can just kind of stand still, or they can retreat back. If our opponent, from out of measure, retreats back, what do we think our reaction should be? And again, our options here is we can move forward, we can also move back, we can stand still, or we can try to hit them. Those are our 4 basic options.
Basically stay there or move forward.
Yeah, I would say typically wait for them because they could be, if I'm taking a step back, I could be trying to draw you in to move forward to give me a tempo to try to get your blade or hit you. Something we've been going over on the defensive fighter in the Beyond the Basics class. Obviously, if your opponent keeps running away, at some point you need to approach. You would want to do that extremely carefully with like very small steps and stuff. But in general, if you're playing the game version of this that I created and stuff, if your opponent runs away from you, you just kind of stand in and wait for them. Because you don't want to give them a tempo by trying to pursue them and stuff. If your opponent remains stationary, what do you think your best option is? Or a option?
Could move forward.
Yep, so at this point, if our opponent is just kind of like stationary, we want to move forward. We want to make sure we have control over their sword because we're out of measure. We don't really have control of their weapon at this point. So for this version of the flowchart, we want to basically reach with the sword first to cover their blade. So I'm basically finding the sword, and then I can step forward and stuff. So again, the sword always goes first, and then I can follow. When I kind of reach with the sword first, I'm kind of probing to see what they do. Because again, when I don't have control over their weapon, if I just move forward, that gives them a tempo. So I want to make sure that I'm covering their sword first. And if I start to cover the sword, they might do something like a disengage or whatever, and now I can react to that. But once I have their sword covered, I can take a step into measure. And what measure, if we take that step forward, do we get into? So widest measure.
Laghissima.
Yeah, Laghissima. So that's our widest measure. If our opponent steps forward, what can we do? Again, they don't have control of our blade. They are not even trying to. They're literally just pointing the sword at us and taking a step forward. We have a few different options. What do we think one of them could be?
This is stepping forward from out of distance, right?
Yep, from out of measure, they are stepping forward.
Okay.
So at that point, you want to step forward.
Yep, we can also step forward. Stepping forward while also finding their sword. What measure would we end up at? If they're moving
Larga.
forward. Sorry, what was that?
Larga.
Yep, exactly. So if our opponent moves forward, they're basically trying to step into Laghissima. So if we also step forward while controlling the sword, obviously, we basically jump over Laghissima and get to Laga, which is our wide measure, the measure that we can hit our opponent with a step lunge. This is a great tactic, especially if you're pretty much for anyone, but really for smaller fencers, because we need to be able to cover more ground to get into our measure. So we're kind of a little bit outside our measure, and we see our tall opponent come forward. If we also move forward while covering their blade, we've now kind of like leapfrogged over one measure, and we might be we could be past where they're comfortable throwing shots from, and we're probably going to be in a better spot for ourselves. But even if you're like equal height with your opponent, if you're fighting me and I'm expecting to be in Laghissima, and all of a sudden I found myself in Laga because I wasn't expecting you to be that bold while still covering my sword, you might get me or any opponent kind of like have that brain freeze to which you can take an advantage of and stuff. It does take, you definitely need to make sure that you are covering their sword while taking that step and stuff. But yeah, that is a good option, especially if you're looking to really like cover a lot of ground fast. There is at least one other good option, and there's one slightly dicey option that we can also do.
You could stay still and just try to keep covering their blade as they come in.
Yep, and so my opponent steps forward, and I just kind of stay here and cover the blade. What measure do I find myself in now?
That would still be just Laghissima.
Yep, also Laghissima. So just like if we step forward when our opponent's standing still, same thing if they come forward and we stand still. The other option we can do, and this one's technically theoretically correct, but I find like it's a lot riskier, is that I could try to strike my opponent because they are stepping forward, which gives me a tempo, and they don't have control what they're stepping forward, which is specifically what the tempo I have. But because it's Laghissima, I need to do my big passing lunge, which is a very long tempo. It's still one tempo, but I have so much ground I need to cover that I need to make sure that either my passing lunge is very explosive or my opponent is going to be very slow to react to me attacking them and stuff. So while it is a technically, like based on theory, you should be able to do it, gets a little risky, and I think you're probably better off either just finding their blade while standing still or also stepping forward to kind of cheat a little bit of measure and stuff. So we're gonna, before we go into the next measure, we're gonna run through all of these as a little virtual partner drill. So you can get on up and grab your swords. We're going to go do these in order first, and then I'll do a few mixed up just to kind of keep it a little bit interesting. So from here, you can decide if you want to find me from the inside or the outside line. Doesn't seem to matter in this level of the drill. But the first thing I can do is I could run away from out of measure. In that case, for the sake of the drill, you just kind of want to wait for me. Realistically, you might need to approach at some point, but you want to be very careful that your opponent's not trying to trick you into coming in too close. So again, if I just run away, you just kind of look at me funny because we're not even cross blades. Why am I running away from you at that point? I could remain stationary. So then you can do your reaction to that, which would be cover my blade and then step forward. Again, we'll make sure that sword goes first and then the body. I could step forward, and you have your two good options. So do one of them. Again, I can step forward from out of measure, and you can practice the other one. So again, you can either stand still and find my blade, which gets us into Laghissima, or you also step forward, and now we're in Laga. So we'll just mix it up. So from out of measure, I stay stationary. And you do your reaction, which should be find my blade and then step forward. Good. Reset. I will step forward. You have your two options to choose from. Good. And reset. I'm going to run away from out of measure. Reaction should be just kind of look at me weird. And I will step forward again. Good. So if you did one reaction, try to do the other one just to kind of practice. And last one, I will remain stationary. So again, you find and then step forward. Good. That all makes sense. Any questions on approaching from out of measure?
Just quick question. When we're finding, should we go into offensive? Is that like an option either way?
Definitely an option. Yeah, so usually like from out of measure, I'm probably going to still be more on my defensive posture. As I approach, I could start leaning forward. And what this does is actually kind of like gets my blade a little bit closer to them. So my feet might still be like in that Laga measure, but I've kind of stolen some measure with my blade. Like you'll see some of the masters will say like steel, not steel measure, but they'll say like gain measure or gain measure on their blade and stuff. Right? That kind of is like, it's not just the body, but now I can lean forward and get even a little bit closer. So if I lunge next time, my tempo is shorter. So that's definitely an option for sure. Good question. Cool, so now we'll go on to the next measure, which is Laghissima. So we'll just imagine that our opponent stood still. We found their blade and stepped forward. So now we find ourselves in Laghissima, which is our widest measure. So again, just as a refresher, Laghissima, we define Laghissima as the distance that I can strike my opponent with my passing lunge or my passing lunge. Either one of those are fine, depending on what the situation and what your body likes to do better. So from Laghissima, if I take a retreating step back, what do you think your reaction should be here? So we're in like widest measure, I'm starting to retreat out of measure, and you have an option.
Keep going forward, step forward.
Yep, so we want to pursue while keeping control over opponent's blade. So if I'm your opponent and I step back because I don't like the idea that you have control of my blade, you basically just follow while making sure you have control over the weapon. And what measure do we end up at in that one?
I would guess it's still Laghissima in that case.
Yep, perfect. It's Laghissima unless, you took a huge step and they took a small one. But imagine that all steps and everything are equal, we are still in Laghissima. Yep. Next option from Laghissima, as your opponent, I could just stand still or kind of wait or fix. How do you think you should react to that based on the 4 rules of the true fight? You have control of my sword from in widest measure. I'm just kind of hanging it out here. Not trying to get
If we have control, we can continue to go forward.
perfect. Yep. So because we're doing this level 1, as your opponent, I'm never trying to do anything with your sword. I'm just waiting to stab you. I'm not trying to do any kind of cool blade work or anything. Yeah, if you have control over your opponent's sword from Laghissima, you can take a step forward. And what measure do we end up at?
Larga.
Yep, perfect. Now, as your opponent, we're still on Laghissima. You have control over my weapon, and I take a step forward. You have 3 options of things you can do to me. What are one of the 3?
Step forward.
Yep. So we both can step forward. So from Laghissima, I step forward. You step forward while continuing control over your opponent's blade. And what measure do we end up at?
Stretta.
Perfect. Yep, Stretta, which is our narrow measure. So that's the measure that we could hit our opponent just with this leaning lunge. Yep. So that's a pretty aggressive step forward. Again, if you're a short fencer, you might want to consider that to get closer to your opponent and you might get past their point, like really past their point with your sword at that point. So that's definitely not a bad idea. What is another option? If your opponent steps forward without control in Laghissima.
Stay still.
Yep. If I'm your opponent and I step forward, you could just stand still, continuing to control over my blade. And what measure do we end up at?
Larga.
Perfect. Yep, Laga. So again, just like if I move forward, your opponent stays stationary and you move forward, you end up in Laga again. Yep. And third option, if I step forward without control from Laghissima, this is the fun option.
Strike.
Yep, you can totally hit me. What footwork do you think you need to hit?
Step lunge.
Yep, perfect. So from Laghissima, as I'm stepping forward, I am starting to get into Laga. So we define Laga basically by being our step lunge distance. So if your opponent decided to step into that measure, that gives us a nice tempo in which we can strike them in. And what tempo, who remembers from last week, what tempo are we striking in when our opponent is stepping into our lunge measure?
Prima tempo.
Yeah, perfect. Awesome, you guys are great. So our 3 options again, if your opponent steps forward, is to just hang out there and keep holding on to control of their sword. Find ourselves in Laga. You can also step forward to get into Stretta. It's a very aggressive step forward move. Well, the fun move that we all like to do is opponent steps forward and we can just strike them as they're taking that step. And what's really important is that we want to make sure that we're hitting the opponent as that foot is midair. So once this front foot lands, we're starting to become a little bit on the late side to land that shot. We really want to hit them while that front foot's in the air. Because once that foot lands, they could do a void, where they could do some other kind of action. But it's much harder for them to react when the foot's in the air. Even to react with the blade, it can be more difficult because the body is in motion. And just dexterity gets a little bit funky when we're kind of in motion like that. So I always want to try to aim them while that foot is midair. So now we'll do the same thing like we did without a measure, as we'll go through all those 3 options. And then I'll kind of mix them up. So you have found me in Laghissima from any of the multiple ways we could get here. And I don't like the idea that you have control over my sword, and I decide I'm going to try to run away. You do your reaction, which should be just basically to pursue while continuing to hold on to control my sword. Good. Free reset. Again, we're still in Laghissima. I just kind of freeze. I don't like where I'm at, but I don't do anything. Your reaction should be to keep control and step forward, finding yourself now in Laga. Good. Free reset. If I step forward, you have your 3 different options. 1, you can hang out, find me in Laga. Second option, you can step forward and find me now in Stretta. Or you can do a step lunge as I'm going forward. So we'll do that 2 more times so you can practice the other 2 options. From Laghissima, I step forward. You do another option there. Good, reset. I step forward, and you do the third option. Cool. Now I'll just kind of mix it up, see how you do. From Laghissima, I stay still. The action should be to find my blade, continue to find my blade and go forward, good. Reset, I step forward. You have one of the three options to do. Good. Reset. I step forward again. Do one of the other of the three options. Good. Reset. I step back. Good. Reaction should be to keep control and pursue. And lastly, I step forward. And then you have that third step forward reaction. Any questions on Laghissima? There's a lot going on that one. Cool. And just to kind of, as a refresher in terms of, ooh, stab myself with ladder openers, that's fun. In terms of what I'm talking about by the measures and stuff, just because it's been a little while since we've really talked about it, and it's not a big deal if this was an in-person class, because we'd be doing it all the time. Oh man, my webcam just went. Come on, get back. Oh, keep trying. Focus, focus. Oh, that's good enough for now. All right, so if this is your blade, this is my blade. From out of measure, again, it's when our points aren't crossed at all. Laghissima is when we can do our passing lunge, but like visually between swords, it's basically when the tips stop crossing. Obviously, that's if we are the same height with the same reach in the same like sword and stuff. If I am taller than my opponent, that might look, I'll be in my Laghissima before you, so my Laghissima might be here, and yours might need to be more like a little bit more blade crossed and stuff. So just realize that this is everything is equal, not playing in with heights and stuff, because that just there's too many variables and variations for that to really consider at this point. So yep, so out of measure, Laghissima. The next one would be Laga, which we get a little bit more blade crossing. So we're not quite at meta spotter. We're like from the meta spotter or that like first third from the point basically. So that's our next measure we're going to work in. I can get my webcam to focus. There we go. Oh man. Wouldn't insult you all with a rehearsed show. All right, sorry about that. So we're going to jump into Laga. So now we've, in one of our multiple ways, we've got into Laga. Maybe we're both out of measure. I step forward, you also step forward. So now we are in Laga. Again, I have, as your opponent, I got three basic options. The first one is I don't like where we're at, and I try to run away by taking one retreating step. What do you think your reaction should be on that one?
To keep control and move forward.
Yep. So what measure do we end up at the end of that?
You would stay in the same Larga measure.
Yep. Again, would still be in Laga because I'm trying to get to Laghissima. You come forward, so now we continue to be in Laga. Yep. Another option could be you could do a passing lunge from there. Again, that can be a little bit dicey. I feel like it's a little less dicey when the opponent's kind of running away a little bit. But again, like that's such a long tempo that if they do a quick retreating step while you're still in the middle of your passing lunge, they could parry repose to do some kind of counter and stuff. So just remember, it's theoretically an option, but you gotta be spot on if you really want to land that and stuff. My next option as your opponent from Laga again is I can just remain stationary, just hang it out here. What do you think your option could be? Your best option is?
Step forward.
Yep. And what measure do we find ourselves in there?
Stretta.
Perfect. Yep. So from Laga, if you still, so I'm going switching your row. So I am now the person doing this correctly. I have control of my opponent's weapon. They just hang out. I want to get a little bit closer, so I get into Stretta. And this could just be like a small passing step. Again, this depends on like really your range and your opponent's range. But it doesn't need to be big. Once the blade's across, I really want to do small steps. So I could just do like maybe one medium step to get into Stretta at that point. I might do a couple of small ones just to see in case my opponent tries to do something funky during my footwork. But the idea is we want to try to move forward while we have control from Laga into Stretta. Your footwork action is going to really kind of depend on how you like to move and who you're facing and stuff. But again, once blades across, smaller is typically better for safety and just not giving your opponent a tempo. Perfect. If I, from Laga, step forward, what are your options?
Strike.
Yep. And what tempo do you think that would be?
That would be a primo tempo at that point.
It could be. Yep. So like I've had some fun debates with other practitioners on this. I say it's more primo tempo because the opponent is just kind of stepping forward into a lunge range, even if it's not your step lunge. Some people made a case for contra tempo. That basically the assumption is if our blades are that cross already and your opponent is stepping forward, they're trying to hit you. So if you hit them in that tempo, they see that as a counterattack. I think when it comes down to it, which tempo it is doesn't super matter as long as you realize that is a tempo to hit, because a lot of these things kind of can blur together a little bit. What type of attack would you use on that one?
Leaning lunge?
Yep. So, yep, because they're stepping into Stretta at that point, then we could just go into we extend offensive posture and then lean into our leaning lunge. Yep. Perfect. What's another option we can do if our opponent steps forward?
We could just step forward and try to hold them, but we'd be pretty darn close at this point.
So if we're in Laga, so we're in Laga, our opponents have to go forward, we just have to go forward. We get into basically Strettissima,
So
which is our closest measure, and that's where you want to go if you want to wrestle, if you really want to start grappling, or like in the SEA case, unless you're in a kingdom that has grappling, you're now infighting, which maybe that's what you want to do. But assuming that we just have single rapiers, we're either grappling, we're pummeling each other. We've basically left the realm of beautiful swordplay, and we're getting to thuggery, which is its own fun. But it's a little bit outside the scope of this. I like your boldness, Lissa. Love it, love it. The safer option that the Italian sword masters would probably like better is just to kind of like hand out here while you have control of the blade, and now your opponent steps into your Stretta measure. So you can just kind of, it's like maybe you weren't expecting them to step forward, and you're just kind of like, oh, I don't know what you're doing getting that close, but you still have control over their weapon and stuff. Good. So let's roll through all of those as a virtual partner drill, just like we've been doing with the other two. So again, if we set up, we are in Laga. We got here, maybe I didn't expect to get here, I don't like it. I tried to run away with a retreating step, and your best course of option here is to continue to control my blade and pursue, so we stay in Laga. You could do your passing lunge if you are very sure of yourself. I could, if we reset, and again, we're in Laga, and I just remain stationary. Your best action here is just to keep control and step forward. So now you will find yourself in Stretta. For reset, again, we're still at Laga. I step forward. You have two safe options. One is you could strike me as I take that step with a leaning lunge. And the other one is you just hang out and continue to find me in Stretta. So if I take another step forward, you can do that second option. Cool. So now we'll just mix it up a little bit. So from Laga, I will step forward. You do one of your two options, and we reset. From Laga, I will take a retreating step. Your best option again is to keep control and pursue. If I remain stationary from Laga, Again, your best option is to step forward into stretta while keeping control over my weapon. And lastly, if I take a step forward, you have your second option of the two, which is either find my blade still while it's hanging back or hit me as I step forward. Cool. Any questions on Laga? Cool. So before we get into stretta, I want to just kind of give a general tactical idea of what these Laghissima and Laga is. These are really measures where we're kind of waiting for our opponent to do something. Especially like Laghissima, we're really just a little too far to be able to just hit them without giving them a tempo. Laga, it's a little bit safer, but we still want to act in tempo. So in both those measures, we're really reacting to what our opponent is doing. But we're doing this while we have control over their weapon. So we're not just kind of like hanging out here and wait to see what they do and then trying to get control of the blade. We have control over their weapon, so we have control over the fight, and we're just reacting to what they're doing, so we make the right response and stuff. And most likely it's going to be stepping forward to get a little bit closer while controlling the weapon, but there are those opportunities to strike if you're on the ball enough while they move forward and stuff. So again, Laghissima and Laga, this is what we're really kind of reacting to our opponent's movements. When we get to Stretta, this is where we need to take the initiative, because our blades are, at Stretta, we're probably mezza-spada to mezza-spada or slightly close and further down on this. So we're very close. So waiting for our opponent to do something is usually not the best course of action, because we're so close that even if we have control over their weapon, they could throw a shot around there, or they could just make a movement that's so fast that we can't react because we're so close and stuff. But we still have a decision tree from here. But the idea is once we get into Stretta, we want to be doing something and not waiting for our opponent to do something. But so we are now in Stretta. We are very close to each other. Again, Stretta is our leaning lunge distance, so I can hit my opponent without taking a step with the front foot. But if we are in Stretta and I take a step backwards because we are way too close for my liking, what is your option?
Strike with a step lunge.
Perfect. And what tempo would you say that's in?
Contra tempo?
I would say primo.
Primo?
Yeah. Because I'm stepping back into your lunge range. If I was going forward, you could make a contra tempo argument again, because I am coming towards you, which can be seen as an offensive decision. But if I'm running away, it's definitely not contra tempo. Great job with everything else on those. If we're in Stretta and I just hang out here, I wasn't expected to get here. I have a little bit of a brain freeze. What do you think you should do to me?
We can still kill you from that point if you just hang out with
Yep.
the leaning lunge.
Perfect. Yep. So let's say we step forward, we find ourselves into Stretta. Your opponent just kind of brain freezes. Yeah, we can just kind of extend and do a leaning lunge to hit them basically before their brain resets to be able to do anything. Yep, perfect. And my third option, as your opponent, for some reason, we're in Stretta, I take a step forward. Maybe I really want to wrestle with you, or maybe I like to infight. But for some reason, from Stretta, I'm taking a step forward. What kind of attack should you do? I kind of gave an answer a little bit, but.
Strike with a reverse lunge?
Yeah, perfect. And we haven't gone over reverse lunges, so we get to learn a new footwork action. So reverse lunge, so we're going to end up looking like we're basically in our lunge spot. I could even do a really deep one where it's almost like I'm voiding underneath their weapon. But the idea is, as my opponent's coming forward, I'm going to extend my sword, take a step back with my back leg like I'm starting to do a retreating step, but then I'm just going to drop down onto my lead leg. So yeah, if I'm on my defensive posture, I extend my sword while my back leg takes a small step back, and then I'm going to drop down into my lunge position. The key with this reverse lunge is don't go any deeper than you're comfortable with. So it should be roughly your normal step lunge width in terms of where your feet are. You can go a little bit lower if you have that kind of mobility and flexibility, and make it more of a almost like low body void below their weapon. But at minimum, anyways, we want to make sure that we can at least get out of it. So if I take this huge reverse lunge and I can't easily get myself out of it, it's no good, because if I miss, I'm going to be screwed at that point. So I want to make sure that even with my reverse lunge, with my opponent coming forward, that if once I hit, I can easily retreat back into my defensive stance and stuff. So it can take a little bit of practice, a little bit of work to really get comfortable and figure out where your what your extreme reverse lunge is. Like anything else, you just keep working on it, you'll get more comfortable with it, and you might even find that your reverse lunge can get a little bit bigger. So let's just practice the reverse lunge a handful of times first, and then we'll jump back into the actual flow chart. So with this reverse lunge, I'm extending my sword first, taking a small step back with my back leg, and as that step comes back, takes a step back, I'm sinking down into my lunge. So basically this foot back and the sink down to the lunge is all the same go. If I wanted to break this up into smaller pieces, I would do sword first, and then I would do my leg back while sinking down. It's a little bit harder to kind of break those two up, but sword first, leg back into the sink. And then I can, again, from here, I can recover forward if the situation calls for it, or I can just, again, recover like I usually do by bending that back knee and just shifting my weight back into my defensive stance. I'm just going to see how people are doing on the grid. Good. Also, another note, and this is something you can also do in front of a mirror to really make sure that you're not doing this mistake. But a common mistake, and I do this too sometimes, is when this reverse lunge happens, the butt will kind of kick out. And there's actually some voids where like you want to do like kind of lean over and away and stuff. But for this particular style of reverse lunge, we want to make sure that we're basically in a nice profile with our hips underneath our torso and not the butt not kicking out. So right here, my butt's kind of kicking out. I kind of lose some structure here. So in this one, I want to extend the sword, then drop into it, but I want to make sure that I'm in a nice straight line as best I can anyways. Sweet. Cool. All right, so we'll go back into the flow chart. So again, from Stretta, so we'll do this again as our little virtual partner drill. We are in Stretta. I have my 3 options that I can do as your opponent. The first one is I run away. And your reaction here is to gain my sword and strike with the step lunge. I could also, if we reset, if I just hang out here, not a good idea for me. You take the initiative and you just hit me with a leaning lunge. Good. And third option is if I'm very bold for some reason, or maybe a bit reckless, I step forward from Stretta, and this is where you do your reverse lunge. And you might even find that even from Stretta, if your opponent's stepping forward, you can probably just hit them with just the extension of the sword or a leaning lunge as well. That's not a leaning lunge, off as a posture. So you might not even need to do this reverse lunge. But I do find with the reverse lunge, I can now recover back faster and further away than if I just did here. Now I need to make a bigger motion to get back and stuff. So let's do, now that flow chart, the sort of flow chart, a little bit randomized. So I'm going to just throw out different options and you will react. So from Stretta, I will hang still. So just hang it out, stationary. Your action should be to hit me with the leaning lunge. If we reset, I step forward. Should hit me with that reverse lunge. Or just an extension is fine too. Good. If I step forward from Stretta, again, you hit me with one of those different types of blade actions. Reset. I will step back. Trying to run away, you hit me with a step lunge. Reset. I'm gonna run away again from Stretta. Hit me with a step lunge, good. And lastly, if I step forward, and you hit me with that reverse lunge. Any questions on Stretta?
What are the advantages of doing the reverse step lunge versus just thrusting into you, since you so obligingly jumped on my sword?
Yeah, so I like the reverse lunge for two reasons. One, once I hit and I can recover back, I can get further away from my opponent than if I just did like an extension. Now I got to bring back and kind of run away a little bit. So I find I can get out of measure a little bit faster. Me personally, if you practice it, you might find that you have a harder time getting out of that. That might not be the best option for you. Also with the reverse lunge, a lot of times the way I do it, I kind of do it almost like a low void as well. So I'm dropping down below my opponent's hilt if I can. So now like, even if they were quick when they're throwing the shot, I can kind of get away from their sword, or at least underneath it, and hit them before I can run away. So I can kind of get my body off their line of attack a little bit. But again, that kind of also comes down to what your mobility is like, if your body can handle getting that low. If not, then you might find, just doing the extension or the offensive lean a perfectly fine option.
Well, I find myself tending to want to do it because it looks cool.
Yeah, I mean, I'm always game for people doing the flashy thing if their bodies can handle it and they know how to do it well. Sure, I love it. Get that photo up.
Otherwise, I'm not sure it's good.
Yeah. It's one of those things, like your reverse lunge might be very small at first. Like it could be just kind of like that, and that's fine. And then over time, like if you're able to like get the strength and the mobility in the hips and the groins and stuff, you might be able to find that you can go a little bit deeper and stuff. But making sure you don't hurt yourself in the process is always step one, really. Rather take the shot and lose the belt than pull a groin muscle. Good question, thank you. Any other questions?
More of a footwork question, but instead of one thing that I tend to just naturally think of is, instead of doing a reverse lunge, just do a passing step backwards with my lead foot. You think you have any issues with that?
So this is when from Stretta, the opponent coming forward, and you're just doing a passing step back like that.
That's the basic thought here.
It could work. I think it depends on how aggressive your opponent's coming forward. It's a little easier if I had a partner, I could kind of walk through this. If they're just kind of taking a small step forward, by taking a passing step, I might be pulling my sword back a little bit too far. A better idea might be kind of mixing with the previous question, is extend to hit and then maybe kind of do a passing step to get out of there instead of a reverse lunge. Okay. But I would make sure sword hits first and then take the body out versus start to do the passing step while extending. But yeah, I think that could be a fine option, as long as blade goes first, you take the hit, and then you get the body heck out of dodge. I kind of like that combo. That could be a nice little fun one. Cool. So we're a little bit after 8:30. I want to just kind of run through the entire flow chart as like a little decision tree. So again, I'm always going to be doing either forward, backwards, or stationary. And we're going to go from out of measure until you can hit me. So we'll see how this goes. And I'll let you make what choice you're going to do, and then I will say what the correct answer is, so you can kind of check yourself. Since we're actually not in person to actually physically check on the decisions and stuff. So from out of measure, lay on has been called, and I take a step back from out of measure. Your answer should be just to kind of watch me at this point. Running away from out of measure, no need to chase me down if you can help it. So still out of measure. Now I just hang out there and stationary. I'm not moving. So your option should be to find my blade and take a step forward, finding yourself now covering my sword in Laghissima. So now we're at the widest measure. I don't like this. I'm going to take a step back. So I try to get back out of measure. Your reaction should be to pursue me while still control my sword. So now we're still in Laghissima. From here, I'm going to take a step forward. You have a few different options, but for the sake of this drill, we'll just say that you hang back and find me. So now we're in Laga. You still have control of my sword. We're in Laga. I'm going to take a step back. Your best option there will be to continue to find my sword and follow me, pursue me. So we're still in Laga, good. And now I will take a step forward. And we'll say at this point, this is a good time to hit me. I'm deciding to step from Laga into Stretta. And you can do that leaning lunge to strike me. So that's one example of how this works in terms of like working different measures. And now you got the tempo and close enough measure to strike. We'll do one more to kind of play through. So again, we're starting from out of measure. I'm going to take a step forward, and you can also take a step forward. You can do any of the options, but so we're all on the same page. We'll say you also take a step forward. So now we skip Laghissima, we jump right to Laga. From here, I'm going to take a step back. Your reaction should be to pursue. Still control my sword in Laga. I'm going to just freeze. I got a brain fart, I'm just hanging out here. So now you can take a step in. So now you're in Stretta. I realize I'm in trouble. I don't like this. So I try to take a retreating step back to get out of here. And now there's your tempo to hit me with a step lunge. That makes sense? Simple, a lot of things to kind of keep in mind and stuff. But as long as you kind of keep those 4 rules in mind and stuff, that if we have control, we can move forward. If we don't have control, which isn't part of this this level of the true art flow chart, we need to retreat and gain control. And we always want to make sure we have control of the weapon. And then we want to strike in tempo. So if your opponent's just standing still, we don't want to try to hit them unless we're in Stretta, because we're just so close at that point that them standing still is a tempo. Real quick, I want to show I'll send out this link, but this is the address for it, sword.city/truefight. And this is basically if you wanted to play this choose your own adventure of the flowchart we just did, we can do that. So you would begin your fight, and what your opponent does is all randomized. So like sometimes your opponent will step forward, sometimes they'll stay stationary, sometimes they'll move back. So your opponent moves. In this case, the opponent sword from out of measure, they take an advancing step, and now we have our options. So unlike what we just did today, in which there really wasn't a wrong option because I was kind of like directing you what the correct options are, you could make an incorrect option here, and there are consequences. So our opponent takes a step forward from out of measure. Maybe we try to strike, and then we have an option of which type of attack we want to use. So like maybe we decide, oh yeah, I can hit them from with a leaning lunge, and we find out that we didn't hit them. In some cases, we'll get hit back, but in this case, our opponent wasn't super aggressive, so we just find ourselves back in Missouri Laghissima, and then the game keeps on going until we hit our opponent or they hit us and stuff. So it's just a cool little text-based choose your own adventure game, so you can kind of really get the whole idea down in your brain and stuff. If we can't actually do it in person, we can at least try to memorize what the correct actions are. And then when we try to do it in person, it's going to feel very foreign because now we're actually trying to physically do it, which is its own kind of wonkiness and stuff. Actually, let me grab that link. I'll post it in the chat for everybody. Cool. So there is Sword.City True Fight. So this is week 7. Next week is week 8. we've covered everything that I really wanted to go over. So if there's anything that people wanted me to go back over, or there's something they like that we already covered, or if there's something else about fencing that you would like to see, like, hey, maybe I want a crash course on voids, shoot me a message or leave it in the Facebook event page, and I can try to make a lesson over what people want to go back over or learn that we haven't gone over at all. If I don't get anything, I'll come up with something. There's a whole bunch of fencing stuff we don't actually get to do in the 8 weeks. This is just like our introduction and stuff like that. Mondays, we are still doing our Beyond the Basics class. August month is the defensive fighter. So if you find yourself being a fighter that likes to retreat or hold your ground, this will be a good class for you. Even if you're a very forward motivated fencer, like I like to go forward all the time, there's still going to be at times when I'm fencing where I need to be more defensive. So even if you're more forward motivated, you still might get a lot out of this for those times you need to be more defensive. Starting September, I am doing a different class. So it's still going to be kind of like Intro to Italian Rapier. It's going to basically replace Intro on Thursdays. It's going to be called Back to Basics. And this is going to be, I think I'm going to make it still an 8-week program. It's going to be an hour long. The first half hour, we're really going to just really dive into one technique. So we're going to get into nitty gritty details on things like how to lunge. Just like a half hour of like how to hold yourself, how to break down the lunge and a whole bunch of different steps. And really just focus on this one technique so we can really kind of grind the XP and hone that in and try to make that as best as we can. And then the second half, it's going to be a little bit of a strength and conditioning workout. So it's going to be a little bit of a circuit. It's going to be mixing fencing moves with some general calisthenics body weight exercises. I'm going to try to make the list in an Excel sheet and send it out ahead of time. So if you know that you can't do any push-ups, there will be a scale down, easier scale down option. If you're like, I can do 1 million push-ups, this isn't going to be hard enough, I'll try to do a scale up version. So there should be an exercise for everybody, and I'll have some fallback options. So if you're like, I can't even do the easiest, it might be something simple like you just kind of like walk in place or jog in place or something so you can kind of keep on moving. You can come to both halves. You can just come to one and then dive out of the other. Doesn't matter. Whatever you really want to get out of it. But like I personally am like, I want to kind of move around a little bit more. So I want to try to combine those two. So it's going to be a little bit different than how I've taught these things previously. So we'll see how it goes. Hopefully it's enjoyable and people will kind of get some good stuff out of it. But I'm still going to keep doing the Beyond the Basics on Mondays, even in September, the same way, which really mixes technique in theory and like fencing philosophy and all that stuff. Because I really like talking about that stuff while teaching. So this is where I can kind of have my cake and eat it too with 2 different classes and everything. So keep an eye out for that Facebook event. I'll probably make it in the next few days once I kind of hammer out the details. Is there any final questions before we log off for this evening? Awesome. There is a graphic for the flowchart, so I'll try to dig that out and I'll post that in the Facebook event page as well with the recording and the optional quiz and homework. And I'll also repost the game link as well and stuff. Awesome. I will see you all next week, and I'll hang out for a little bit in case anyone wants to post-practice chat. Thanks, everybody. You guys are great.
Thanks.
Thank you.